Camera action.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Khairunnisa and I will explain to you about Old English literature, Alfred the Great, Beowulf, lyric, and prose. Guys, have you ever wondered about English that we use now? English has a long history, and now I will present to you about Old English, especially Old English literature. The first work in English written in Old English. The oral tradition was very strong in the early English culture, and most literary works were written to be performed. Old English literature, also called by Anglo-Saxons literature. This comes from two tribes, that is Anglos and Saxony. The Anglo-Saxons were Germanic invaders who came from what is now the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. They were from the tribes known today as the Angles, Saxons, Frisians, and Jutes, and set up their own kingdoms in England. The Anglo-Saxons spoke various Germanic dialects, which eventually evolved into the language of Old English, which is the direct ancestor of modern English. A quarter of all English words come from Old English, although these words are very commonly used for everyday objects. For example, day, night, light, yes, he, she, and rain. Even today, the closest language to modern English is still Frisian, the language spoken in the north of the Netherlands by the descendants of the people who became the Anglo-Saxons in Britain. The Anglo-Saxons gave us the names for our days of the week. Names like Monday, meaning moon day, Tuesday was Tuesday. They also had names for remaining days of the week. Friday was Fridge Day for Frigg, the Anglo-Saxons name for Venus, Saturday was Saturnus Duck, and Sunday was Sunday. When we're thinking about how many languages that used in Anglo-Saxons kingdom, there were 5 languages used in Britain, which were British, Scots or Irish, Pictish, English, and Latin. But of those 5 languages, just 2 came to take center stage in the development of linguistic usage in Britain in the Anglo-Saxons kingdoms, and they were English and Latin. English as a spoken language, Latin as the dominant written language. The dominant literary language in the Anglo-Saxons kingdoms was Latin. Latin had a kind of innate authority associated with it because it was one of the sacred language of scripture. The Old English is the long period of English. It started in the 5th century. The father of Old English is Geoffrey Chaucer. One of the more interesting and peculiar categories of textual types is the range of brief notes encountered, mostly commonplace and superstitions. They are often written in margins or on empty leaves, sometimes filling a blank space at the end of a longer text. They are notes, for example, the names of the days, the months, the winds, the letters of the alphabet, the numerals, family relationships. The charms are directed against a wide array of maladies and misfortunes, including fevers, chickenpox, a noxious dwarf, various wounds, the theft of cattle or horses, evil spirits, the loss of a swarm of bees, unfruitful land, and the aches in the eyes, ears, stomach, and teeth. Thus, many of them have affinities with medical recipes, adding only prescribed rituals to the concoction of medicines, and some are actually found in medical manuscripts. And I will explain to you about literary features of the period. The first one is pagan origins. The earliest poems or themes have their origin in the continental home of the English people. Such themes were the common property of the gleemen or scopes who sang them at the feast of the nobles. The second one is anonymous origins. Of all the Old English poets, we can mention of only one Cadman, though not one of the extant poems can definitely be ascribed to him. The name of another poet, Saint Wolf, is known because of the fact that he signed his poems in runic letters at the end of 4 poems. Of the rest, we do not even know the names. Prose, as we have noticed, came later, and as it was used for practical purposes, its authorship in many cases is established. The third one, I would like to explain to you about characteristics of Old English literature. The first one is its alliterative pattern. Old English poetry is characterized by the use of alliteration following what is referred to as the alliterative pattern. This pattern is hallmark of Old Norse and Old English poetries, but its use is common in many other Old Germanic poetic traditions. In these poems, rhyme is absent and the number of syllables in each line of verse is variable. What gives us the rhythm instead is the number of stresses in each line and the use of alliteration, which is the repetition of a phoneme. In this type of poetry, there are no stanzas either. For example, there are so many words that use sh. The second characteristic is the use of cannings. A canning is a type of metaphor in which a concept is conveyed by a compound of 2 words. For example, the noun sea is rarely, if ever, expressed with the equivalent word sea. Instead, it may be rendered of swan road, railway, and several other cannings, and there are hundreds more representing all sorts of nouns. Ring giver or ring breaker for king, battle sweat for blood, sky candle for the sun, and so forth. Most of them are very evocative and full of lyricism. The third characteristic is the language. The difficulty encountered in reading Old English literature lies in the fact that the language is very different from that of today. Its vocabulary is for the most part native, so already there has been some borrowing from Latin. Its grammar shows declinable nouns, pronouns, and adjectives and a more elaborate verbal system than that of today. There were 4 main dialects: Northumbrian, which was the first to produce a literature; Mercian, the language of the Midlands; Kentish, the language of the South, is spoken in an area larger than that of the modern country of Kent; and West Saxons, the language of Alfred, which, due to the political supremacy of Wessex, became a standard and in which almost all the extant texts are preserved. I will explain to you about masterpieces of Old English literature. The first one is Beowulf. Beowulf is typical Old English verse. Beowulf is an epic poem of over 3,000 verses, whose manuscript dates from about the 10th century. The poem is the only epic from the time that has been preserved as a whole. Its author is unknown, but he seems to have a good grasp of the Bible and other great epics. It is the oldest of the great long poems written in English. It is at the very root of the great tree of English language and literature. It is a work of an anonymous 8th century Anglian poet who fused Scandinavian history and pagan mythology with Christian elements. It is about 3,182 lines. Beowulf himself is a king and has to fight a fire-breathing dragon. It opens with a brief account of some of the great heroes of Norse history and legend, setting the stage for a narrative that established B.W. place among these men of valor. Its principal story is divided into 3 segments, with brief interludes linking them. It may have been composed for more than 1,200 years ago, in the first half of 8th century, although some scholars would place it as late as the 10th century. Its title has been assigned by modern editors, for the manuscripts do not normally give any indication of the title or authorship. It was originally composed in the dialect of what was then Mercia. It may be the lone survivor of a genre of Old English long epics, but it must have been a remarkable and difficult work even in its own day. One of the characteristics of Beowulf is elegy. Elegy is apparent throughout life is passing and full of struggles and suffering. This poem begins and ends with the funeral of a king. Some characteristics of the masterpiece are: the first one is origin of the poem. The theme of the poem is continental Germany, and it is likely that it was the subject of Lays long before its present version was completed. The second one is the story. There are so many episodes and digressions in the story of Beowulf that it is almost impossible briefly to give an adequate synopsis of the narrative. The poem concludes with the funeral ceremonies in honor of the dead hero. In final battle, Beowulf is fatally wounded. After his death, his servants bury him in a tumulus in Gotland. If you want to know the poetry of Beowulf, I will give you the poetry. This is it.
What we gar dana in jar dagum feud kuninga thrim ye frunan hutha athalingus ellen fremidon.
And this is the view of the first page of Beowulf. And then I will explain to you about the second masterpieces of all English literature. It is King Alfred. King Alfred has translated many works from Latin, especially in the areas of religion, history, and philosophy. This was the foundation of the written national language. The first translated works included the Pastor's Book. He also translated many historical accounts. In addition, Alfred compiled medical information, annals, chronicles, and information for the law books. His works are very contributed to our literature. Sometimes he translated word for word, but in the other hand, he also translated freely. The chronological order of the translation cannot be determined with any certainty. And here I will give you the example of Alfred the Great prose. The conclusion is Old English literature, also known by Anglo-Saxons literature. It was the literature in the 5th century. It mainly includes medicine, geography, laws, grammar, and poetry. It is the foundation of modern English. Some characteristics of this era are alliteration and cannings. One of the masterpieces in this era is Beowulf. Beowulf is the name of a king who had to fight a fire-breathing dragon, but he died in that war. Beowulf verse talked about elegy, or a poem that told about struggles of the heroes. Furthermore, there is Alfred the Great, who was known as a poet. Alfred the Great translated many books into his own tongue. His works are the contribution for our literature. However, Old English literature is a period that we cannot neglect it because it is very important as the foundation of modern English that we use today. I think enough for me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.